It's time to cook with Susan Beck. I'm here today surrounded by a couple pieces of equipment. I am going to use my food processor and my KitchenAide mixer, as well as my pasta attachments to my mixer as I make my favorite homemade noodles, basil noodles. Out in my garden, the season is winding down, so I want to make some of these fragrant basil noodles before the season is over for my fresh herbs. Next week I'll post a video showing you a great sauce to make to put onto these basil noodles as well. So let's get started with just a few simple ingredients. Into our food processor we will be putting flour, oil, water, basil, and eggs. A simple recipe for any noodles is the eggs, the water, the flour, and the oil. The basil leaves just add another dimension of flavor. We're going to start by putting in our chopping blade into our food processor, followed by 1 1/4 cups of basil leaves. We are going to first put the lid on and chop these fine. Little pulsing action usually works quite well. As you can see, those leaves are becoming smaller and smaller. Once they are nice and chopped up in little pieces, we will add our 3 cups of flour directly to the mixing portion of our food processor. So there's 1 cup, 2 cups, and 3 cups of flour. Now we will combine the basil and the flour. Mix that together. It looks like some of the basil is sticking to the side, so I'm just going to use my spatula to stir that up a bit. And now my flour has green flecks to it. The next step is to add the egg to a bowl and then pour them in as we mix. 1 egg, 2 eggs, didn't crack that one very well, and 3 eggs. Next we have 1 1/4 cup water plus a tablespoon. 1 1/4 cup water and 1 tablespoon water, followed by 2 teaspoons of olive oil. Our dough is coming together nicely, and now it's time to knead. To knead this, you could do this by hand by simply taking it out of the container and dusting the table with some flour and kneading like you would for any bread. Because I own a KitchenAide mixer with a nice dough attachment, I'm going to let the mixer do the work. If you're kneading by hand, it takes about 8 to 10 minutes of kneading to thoroughly work your batter. So I'm going to put my dough hook on, raise it up, and set it at about the 4 setting and let it do its job. My dough hook is kneading our noodle dough. Turn off the mixer here and let's see what our dough looks like. It's all in one nice ball now. Our next step, and I'm just going to use this bowl for this, is to let this sit for 30 minutes just to rest. I like to cover it with a kitchen towel and just let it sit there for 30 minutes. It's time to make our pasta dough into sheets of pasta. After that, we'll turn it into some fettuccine noodles today. So this has just had a chance to set. As you can see, it doesn't really stick to my hands when I kind of knead it around a little bit. I am going to break this into 4 different pieces and work with it in smaller amounts. Now as I do that, I notice it is a bit on the sticky side, so I left my flour out. I may need to add some flour to this if I have trouble getting it to go through my rollers. I simply add my pasta roller attachment to the top of my KitchenAide mixer and tighten. I'm going to set this on about a 2 or so, and we'll see how well this goes through and how sticky it is. I want to be sure that's set on a 1 dial to begin with. And I'm going to run that through, and it came through pretty nicely. Usually I go through the 1 roller, which is a little wider, a couple times just to get it in a nice shape. Sometimes it falls apart and you have to do that a few times to get a nice, somewhat rectangular sheet of pasta. So I just moved that to the 2, so it's getting a little narrower. And I'm going to now move it to the 3. And my dough is plenty sticky, but it is going through. Again, if it is on the sticky side and you can't get it to go through well, and need some more flour in. I'm going to go to a 4 on this for fettuccine. With the KitchenAide press, a 4 or a 5 is where you usually roll it to. So I've got one long piece of pasta here. And I'm going to hang that over here on my drying rack. Now for my drying rack, you can buy some fancy drying racks, but I simply use a clothes rack, and I like to just cover each of the bars with a kitchen towel. Then I don't have to worry about them sticking to this or anything and keeping them clean, since I'm using some clean dish towels. And I just line each one of these with one of these towels and hang them until I'm ready to cut them into the fettuccine pieces. I roll all of them and then I do my noodle cutting. So again, I need to set this back on a 1. I want to start on the widest section and let it roll through at least twice. And then I'm going to go to a 2 and a 3. And finally, a 4. I usually find that this recipe makes enough pasta for my family of 4 to have pasta twice. So I'll hang that over here again and move on to my other balls. I think I'm going to actually break these down a little smaller. Now, if you don't have a pasta roller, you could do this with a rolling pin and a pizza cutter. Roll it out on a floured surface, of course, because it is going to get sticky as you work with it, and then just cut your noodles using a pizza cutter. So don't think you have to get some fancy equipment in order to be able to do this. All right, so I'll continue on, always going back to that 1 setting first as I roll my noodles through. I think I'm going to do that one a 3rd time. All right, I probably got that turned up a little higher than usual. Going to my setting of 2, and I will just continue to do this until all of my pasta dough is hanging over here in sheets. Look at these gorgeous sheets of pasta. I just love the green color with the dark flecks of basil. Notice I usually put a towel underneath as well in case any of them break. For example, right here, this one tore off and I lost half of my pasta sheet down here on the floor. So because it wasn't sitting on the floor, I was able to pick it up and re-roll it into a nice sheet. Let's trade out the pasta roller for our fettuccine cutter. My pasta set came with a spaghetti cutter as well as the fettuccine, but today I'd like the wider noodles. So let's give this a go. Turning it back to, around 3 or 4 again, and putting those noodles through the cutter. And there come out my noodles, and I'm going to leave them over here to hang and dry. So something I noticed in cutting this first sheet of pasta is that these were pretty sticky and my noodles really aren't separating very well. So I'm going to step away from these for a little while and let them dry for maybe another 30 minutes so that they will actually cut and separate a little better than they are at the moment. I don't want to have to sit and hand pick each one of those apart, and I really don't like it when they make one big thick heavy noodle. Here are all my basil noodles cut into strips of fettuccine. I want to leave them to dry for at least an hour before I boil them in heavily salted water. I want to bring that water to a boil with the salt and then add the pasta. You will definitely notice the difference between the water being salted or unsalted. Next week, I'll post a recipe for a yummy, creamy mozzarella sauce that you could use on top of these noodles. In the meantime, if you do not plan to use all of them at one time, you can freeze them by putting them into a Ziploc bag, dusting them with plenty of flour to keep them from sticking together. Do not use a vacuum sealer, it'll just mush it all together into a ball. You could also store this for a day or two in your refrigerator and serve the fresh pasta later. Enjoy your fresh basil pasta.